The reports of the death of Digimon Custom R are greatly exaggerated. Welcome back. What is up, digital companions? My name is Karn EX and welcome back to another video. And you know, with the rise of AI slop here on YouTube, it feels good to get back to paying actual artists who picked up actual pencils, at least digitally, to make some custom art. This video was made possible thanks to my patrons over on patreon.com/KarnEX, specifically my sovereigns, ZDK14, Chaotic Prophet, Jeremy Babineau, and Lupus Lichlord, and my Deva Artbringer Murby Studios. If you consider joining them and becoming a patron, we have lots of rewards for supporting the channel financially, but if you can't afford to do that, that's totally fine. Just liking, subscribing, and hyping the video if you've got the option on mobile would be amazing. Thank you. Alright, so Bond evolutions, huh? These, of course, were prominently seen in Digimon Adventure Last Evolution Kizuna and are a little different to Biomerge that Tamers had in its season. While they can be visually similar, if we look at Agumon Bond of Courage and Gabumon Bond of Friendship versus the Biomerges in Tamers, they're a little bit more pared down, a little more alien and creepy. This is not about merging the traits of the human and the Digimon like we see in Gallantmon, Sakuyamon, Mega Gargomon, and Justimon. So it was difficult trying to make something different here, a final evolution representing the bond of all of the Tamers Digimon. But what it did mean is that, like in Digimon Story Time Stranger, they're treated as a Mega Plus level. Every Digimon in Tamers is on the table. There's no awkwardness with MarineAngemon being a Mega, for example. But we begin with Takato's partner Guilmon, their bond reaching its zenith to create Guilmon, Bond of Power, drawn by Weirdomon. And this screams Bond to me. I think Weirdomon absolutely delivered. There are elements, of course, that match Gallantmon, but without the big weaponry. I think that's something that's quite important for the bonds. Their weaponry is all kind of part of their body, with Agumon Bond of Courage taking its tail out and using that as a weapon. So the slightly creepier, weirder proportions of the bonds is perfect here, with some Gallantmon elements and some Megidramon elements, like the two halves of Guilmon's Megas from the Tamers continuity have merged together. Plus, as I'll talk about more in a little bit, you can also see elements of Growlmon and War Growlmon here too. I also chose the name Guilmon Bond of Power because I don't think they would use the crests from Adventure here. So in some ways I'm kind of coming up with crests for the Tamers kids, although really what I'm actually doing is reflecting on the elements, the traits, the pursuits that might have led them here, and I'll explain that through each one. So for Guilmon Bond of Power, this is about Guilmon and Takato finally learning to control their power. Guilmon was never really struggling for firepower, especially when it dark digivolved or became its true form Megidramon. So Guilmon Bond of Power is a representation of, with great power comes great responsibility. And that is seen all throughout this design, a destructive, draconic fire Digimon still emblazoned with the digital hazard, but now reaching its final evolution, fully in control and ready to save the human and digital worlds. It summons the energy of its internal dragon and its nobility to create a destructive flame that reduces an opponent to ashes, its final Megiddo driver. Moving over to Renamon, I recruited Soru, and this was a very tough task too. So Koyamon already in many ways has that more slimmed down kind of vibe that the bonds have. So I told Soru to go with something creepier, more reminiscent, like I say, of the bonds that we actually have from Last Evolution Kizuna. And so Soru created Renamon, Bond of Companionship. I chose the name Bond of Companionship to obviously reference the Bond of Friendship. Rika, in my mind, being kind of like mostly the Matt of Tamers, although with some Sora elements. Her broken heart t-shirt being repaired as the season goes on through her friendship with the other kids and of course her partner Renamon. And this is still a very feminine Bond form, but just a little bit more creepy, which I love. And with more elements reminiscent of evolutions of Renamon besides Sakuyamon. You can consider the bonds Agumon and Gabumon to almost be like an alternate take on the champion in some ways. Gabumon Bond of Friendship being able to turn into a motorbike is kind of evocative of the quadruped Garurumon. And similarly, Agumon Bond of Courage has a lot of Greymon elements, but not really War Greymon elements. So in Renamon Bond of Companionship, we can see elements of Cubimon specifically, but also little parts of Taumon. It's a great design, I really love it. Soru nailed that slightly uncanny valley feel, which I think the bonds have. Big fan. Renamon Bond of Companionship companionship is a mystic, but also capable of, frankly, throwing hands. It calls forth a huge rush of thousands of gemstones that form a gigantic mandala, stunning all that view it and then raining down gemstones like meteors from above with its fractal mandala. Okay, some guy 944 had a challenge here with a Terriermon bond, creating a humanoid Mega Plus Digimon that didn't feel like Mega Guardromon, but still evoked it. It felt different, and I think he nailed it with Terriermon, Bond of Discipline. Yes, of course there are elements here that evoke Mega Guardromon, but also regular Guardromon, in a much more pared down kind of cast off feeling. It's actually giving me Magna Garurumon versus Magna Garurumon detached, but with more muscles visible. It's definitely more of a Bond style evolution with those lines running through the design. And like I said, it's important with the others, elements that evoke Guardromon and Rapidmon as well as Mega Guardromon. There's even some gold here which you could see as referencing Rapidmon armor. I chose the name Bond of Discipline to reference the discipline that Terriermon needed to learn, and indeed the discipline that Henry got through his family and his hobbies. He's a very disciplined boy. Terriermon, especially when it digivolves to Guardromon for the first time, is reckless. Terriermon's always kind of doing things it shouldn't be and getting in trouble, so learning that discipline with Henry is what led to this Bond evolution. Terriermon Bond of Discipline is capable of delivering 100 incredibly fast punches all around an enemy before throwing them in the air and unleashing an assault of bullets with its boom boom barrage. Next, I got HLR on board to create a Monodramon bond. This was also an exercise in trying to find something different to Justimon and still add elements of the Monodramon evolution line, which is where we got Monodramon Bond of Redemption. HLR was inspired by Justimon, Cyberdramon, and the Cyberdramon Cross Wars version to create this Dragoon. HLR wanted to go with more of a Tokusatsu feel for this, and I think that's appropriate given Justimon being basically a Kamen Rider. HLR said he wanted to give it something like the Dragon Shield and took inspiration from the Cross Wars Cyberdramon since it already felt kind of Bond-like with its weird anatomy and slightly xenomorph feel. What we get here is still a hero, a Dragoon reminding me of Kane from Final Fantasy, but there's something darker there. The Cyberdramon half comes through much more clearly because it hasn't been purified in the same way that Biomerge purified it. Monodramon Bond of Redemption is a literal redemption for this character, for everything it went through in its past and current lives. Cyberdramon able to de-digivolve back down to a rookie again and then Bond Digivolve. It gathers the energy of all its past lives as Cyberdramon and Millenniummon and maybe beyond to puncture up to 2 enemies and send intense digital energy coursing through them and sending out a blast in either direction that also explodes anything in its path, known as the Millennium Impaler. Was very excited to get Adriano Divino back on board for this video to tackle our Leomon bond. This is going to be our first exception for this video where instead of being a rookie, the bond comes from a champion. You could consider this an Lopmon bond if you want to, I think that's totally fine, but we didn't technically see Lopmon as Jerry's partner Leomon pre-evolution, so I'm just using the lowest stage we saw in the anime as the name of the bond here, and that's what led Adriano Divino to create Leomon Bond of Resurrection. Yes, I always imagine a scenario where Jerry's Leomon could come back. It's a little bit Disney cookie cutter ending, I know, but it would be kind of cool. Adriano Divino said that he wanted to keep that wearing pants look that Leomon had, and also give a special gauntlet or shield to reference the puppet that Jerry had, and I love that. I love doing that whenever we do a Jerry evolution. You can see the way that the hair and mane glow, just like the lines on the body, very evocative of Agumon Bond of Courage and Gabumon Bond of Friendship, giving it a powerful and energetic look. This is a Leomon back from the dead, resurrected, full of that Bond energy it gets from its tamer, and I do love that it's got this very armored lower half and this very Bond-like muscular top half. I think the Leomon lovers are still gonna love this one. With that giant lion gauntlet and shield, like I say, referencing Jerry's puppet, it all comes together beautifully. Leomon Bond of Resurrection summons its life energy into its new powerful gauntlet, making it shine with blazing golden light, and delivering a punch so devastating it's impossible to witness. The Gauntlet of the Beast Emperor. Next, Digimon also came on board for this video for our Lopmon Bond bond. Yep, everyone that got a partner in this season is getting a bond in this video. Creating Lopmon, Bond of Recovery. I chose the name Bond of Recovery because that seems to be a lot of the theme going on with Lopmon in this season, recovering from its darker days as a Deva, recovering from de-digivolution, and recovery together, you know, helping out others. Next Digimon was inspired by Chinese dancers to create this form because of the Wong family, of course, being Chinese. It's a beautiful, elegant dancer, but very humanoid. You can see the human face under the kind of Lopmon mask. And now these Lopmon ears are formed into bigger claws, more evocative of Wendymon, and indeed the form itself looking a little bit more like Antilemon, especially with the chest covering. I love the braided hair and the fluidity of the design, and just that little touch of the golden moon for the moon rabbit. This is definitely a sister to Jogamon. Lopmon Bond of Recovery dances beautifully, whipping up an intense hurricane that pulls in its opponents into the merry spectacle. When Lopmon Bond of Recovery's dance finishes, it strikes a pose and throws all that were lured into its hurricane far past the horizon. This is its hurricane judgment. HLR came back once again, this time for Hagurumon or Guardromon. I can't actually remember if we ever saw Kazu's Guardromon as a Hagurumon, so I'm going to call this a Guardromon Bond, but there's some Hagurumon elements. In Guardromon Bond of Compassion. So first off, yes, you can see the Andromon elements here, which makes sense because Guardromon, if it was the one to bond Digivolve, that would be its next level normally. But thrown in there is much more of the bronze and golds we see in Hagurumon and Guardromon, creating this much less tattered Andromon form. It's almost like an alternate take on High Andromon. In fact, I could see High Andromon digivolve into this quite easily, but with some of that slightly more uncanny valley humanoid vibe that the bonds from Last Evolution Kizuna have. And I think the lines that we see in the bonds as well really translates nicely to this mechanical cyborg android design. I chose the name Bond of Compassion because I think that's something that Kazu shows to, of course, Guardromon, but people in general. It's one of his good traits. I think compassion works quite well, given that Kazu wears something that looks quite similar to what's known as the crest of sincerity in Japan or the crest of reliability in the English media. A sincere, reliable kid underneath a big veneer of silliness that he shows. And again, I think compassion works quite well there. He shows compassion to Guardromon and others. Guardromon Bond of Compassion uses its data ports to connect to all opponent Digimon in its vicinity, simultaneously learning everything they know and then flooding their consciousness with an electrifying wave that destroys them in an instant. The lightning singularity. Renamon was also on board again for our one and only mega level Digimon that's going to bond evolve. Like I say, the bonds are treated as mega plus in Time Stranger, ultra levels, level 7s quite often, so it's fine in my opinion for MarineAngemon, one of the lower powered mega Digimon we see in Tamers, to bond evolve, I think, and does something a little different, leading to MarineAngemon Bond of Piety. Like I say, drawn by Weirdomon. I chose the name Bond of Piety because honestly it's a struggle to think of a trait that MarineAngemon has because its appearance is so much more brief in Tamers than others, but I also think that it's something that Kenta could embody. Maybe not the religious side of piety, but certainly the reverent side. In the pairing of Kazu and Kenta, he's the slightly dweebier, more reserved of the two. Piety can also be a belief which is accepted with unthinking conventional reverence, and I think he almost has piety in his partner. Plus, it would bring everything around because MarineAngemon is not technically Angemon species. It's a marine angel, a sea angel, but the piety of its partner and the Digimon have led it to, through bond evolution, become a more angelic Digimon. And yes, this is very intentional, but it does remind me as this big Mega Man superhero of Arthur from The Tick. As the drawing was coming together, I said to Weirdomon that that's what it reminded me of, and he was like, oh, should I change it? And I said, absolutely not. I think that works fantastically comparing Arthur to Kenta. Big round glasses, you know, I just think that works so perfectly. If Kazu and Kenta became the Tick and Mothman, I do think Kazu would be the Tick and Kenta would be Mothman. But we also get tons of cool stuff added, of course, very Bond-like with the more humanoid form, angelic wings throughout the design, those lines that I think are important, and a big old Mega Buster. I love it. MarineAngemon Bond of Piety uses its ultimate heart beam, which fires a huge wave of energy from its hand cannon that could pacify an entire army of Digimon. Next up is Impmon, which all trade jumped on board for, creating Impmon Bond of Forgiveness. And yeah, forgiveness is obviously the trait that Impmon and Bielsamon embody. Forgiving their previous partners forgiving them, forgiving itself for its sins, and being forgiven at least partially by people like Jerry and Takato for what it did. All trade like the idea of a split, since Impmon's narrative is both one of building himself back up and earning forgiveness. That's why All Trade added stitches into the design. We do have V-Pet evolutions for Impmon, originally like Meramon and Skull Meramon leading into Bielsamon. However, like I said, we didn't see those in the anime, so All Trade lent specifically on Impmon and Bielsamon for this design, giving it the pendant from Leomon's necklace, as it would still have some Leomon data in it, the teddy bear arm as a nod to its own trauma back in the day, with Iron Marco treating him like a toy and tearing that teddy in half, and the gun arm is a fusion of the Corona Destroyer and Behemoth, Bielsamon's bike. All Trade wanted to give it a unique weapon while utilizing as many elements of Bielsamon and Impmon as possible. It all comes together so beautifully in my opinion. It doesn't resemble Bielsamon, but it absolutely feels like Impmon and Bielsamon to me. Again, with those bond-like elements we're looking for in just a fantastic aura. Impmon Bond of Forgiveness revs the engine of the Behemoth on its arm, which surges forward, allowing Impmon Bond of Forgiveness to rip and tear through the evil Digimon it now opposes with its Behemoth Destroyer. Oh, and when I said every partner from Tamers, I meant every partner from Tamers. Dobermon, Labramon, to the stage. And we do begin with Alice's partner, Dobermon, who next Digimon came back for to create Dobermon Bond of Paradise. I really struggled to find a kind of crest, I guess, equivalent for Dobermon here, but given how much Dobermon is related to Anubismon and Plutomon, connected to death and the afterlife, and indeed there is even some suggestion that maybe Dobermon and Alice are already dead in Tamers, I thought Paradise was a good place to go, aiming for that paradise, either a paradise on Earth when they defeat the D-Reaper, or a paradise in the afterlife if Alice and Dobermon are dead. And next Digimon really pulled it off in my opinion. This form definitely is Dobermon, but it also evokes Anubismon and even Plutomon with the coloration, and I love how the kind of LED lines that we see in the other bonds here become like tubing and jewelry through the whole design. It's so silky and smooth, this definitely looks like a shepherd into the afterlife. Dobermon Bond of Paradise coldly observes its opponent and judges their soul. If their opponent is of good moral standing, it's said that they witness the face of the digital world's god before being fully healed and sent on their way. However, for evil and wicked opponents, Dobermon Bond of Paradise clicks its fingers and hordes of undead spirits spill out to claim the soul of the evildoer. This is called the Afterlife Summoning. And yes, finally that brings us to Labramon, who I got dry to Bond Digivolve, creating Labramon Bond of Protection. Protection felt like such a no-brainer here. Because Labramon and Sesamon connect to the guard dogs of Chinese mythology, or the guard lions, and because Labramon itself is kind of a Digimon version of the dog that Minami lost, and indeed she loses Labramon too, spoilers, protection felt like a very good theme. And indeed, as Dry said, Labramon and Sesamon are guard dogs, with the latter being a reference to the guardian dog or lion statues. And it holds the key to destroying Mephistomon by sacrificing itself. Those are the main points that Dry used to determine the design philosophy for the bond, which led to the human version of the guardian dogs, the Neo from Japanese Buddhist mythology. They are the Buddha's bodyguards and can be found guarding certain temples in the form of statues, just like the dogs. I love this design from Dry. You can see the Labramon and Sesamon elements totally here, and I just love how true to that kind of like more Chinese and East Asian influence it is, while still feeling 100% like a bond. If this was battling next to Agumon and Gabu Bond, you wouldn't blink an eye. Labramon Bond of Protection shields its allies, protecting them physically and remedying their ailments. It then absorbs the negative energy that plagued their allies and channels it into its large fists, leaping into close quarters combat that has been observed to be able to defeat even Eldradimon and King Waymon, its great wall of resistance. So that is it, our Bond Evolution custom art for the Digimon Tamers cast. Guilmon Bond of Power, Renamon Bond of Companionship, Terriermon Bond of Discipline, Monodramon Bond of Redemption, Leomon Bond of Resurrection, Lopmon Bond of Recovery, Guardromon Bond of Compassion, MarineAngemon Bond of Piety, Impmon Bond of Forgiveness, Dobermon Bond of Paradise, and Labramon Bond of Protection. Thank you to all the artists for making this possible. The links are in the description down below. As you can tell, there are quite a lot of pieces of custom art on this video, so it was a pretty expensive one. So massive thank you to my sovereigns, ZDK14, Jeremy Babineau, Chaotic Prophet, and Lupus Lichlord, as well as my Dava Artbringer, Murby Studios. I'm going to be taking some some changes to the David tier soon. Thank you to everyone else who supports me over on patreon.com/Karn EX and my amazing YouTube channel members here on YouTube. I'll see you next time when we go digital. Bye bye.